unaware of her $200 million inheritance. Her in-laws threw her and her twins out after her husband died. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and earth as Emily Carter stood beside the freshly covered grave of her husband. The small cemetery on the outskirts of Millfield, a quiet town in rural Ohio, had never felt more oppressive. The whispers of those attending faded into the background as Emily focused on the small hands gripping hers. Her 4-year-old twins, Lily and Noah, dressed in their best clothes, confused and scared. She had tried to prepare them for this moment, but how could any child understand the finality of death? Emily, now 32, had not yet fully absorbed the reality of Michael's passing. It had been a car accident, sudden, brutal, and unexplained. One call in the middle of the night, and everything she knew collapsed. Since then, her days had become a blur of funeral arrangements, consoling her children, and enduring the cold stares of her in-laws. Charles and Victoria Carter had never accepted her, not truly, from the day she married Michael. Their disapproval had lingered like an unwelcome shadow. And now, with their son gone, their thinly veiled contempt had turned into something sharper. Standing a few feet away, Charles watched the burial with an impassive expression, arms crossed, mouth a firm line. Victoria held a silk handkerchief but dabbed at dry eyes, her gaze occasionally drifting to Emily with something close to disdain. Emily could almost hear their unspoken thoughts. She never belonged here. As the final prayer was spoken, Emily remained rooted, her knees trembling, a lump swelling in her throat. She wanted to cry, scream, collapse, but she couldn't, not with her children watching, not with those eyes judging her. She tightened her grip on Lily and Noah's hands and swallowed her grief like a stone. Back at the Carter estate, the atmosphere was no more welcoming. The large colonial-style house, passed down through generations, loomed with silent judgment. Emily had lived there since marrying Michael, but it never felt like home. The halls echoed with whispers that stopped when she entered a room. The family portraits that adorned the walls seemed to scowl rather than smile. Even Michael, despite his efforts to protect her from his family's cruelty, had failed to shield her entirely. That evening, as guests trickled out and the sun dipped behind the trees, Emily found herself alone in the kitchen. The twins were asleep upstairs, emotionally spent, while she remained by the sink, staring blankly out the window. Her black dress felt like a costume that no longer made sense, a garment for someone else's tragedy. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. She turned to see Victoria entering the room, still composed, still cold. "You should try to get some rest," Victoria said, voice clipped. "The children will need you tomorrow." Emily nodded silently, unsure how to respond. The words weren't cruel, but they lacked any warmth. There was no empathy, no shared sorrow for the man they both loved. It was as if Michael had been a thread barely tying them together, and now that thread had snapped. When Victoria left, the silence returned. Emily exhaled slowly, allowing a single tear to fall before wiping away. She had made it through the day. Barely. Tomorrow, she would figure out what came next. She didn't yet know that everything she assumed about her marriage, her security, even her place in that house, was about to unravel. The funeral had been the end of the chapter, but the real story was just beginning. And beneath the surface of grief, there was something else simmering. Tension, secrets, decisions being made without her knowledge. Emily could feel it, though she couldn't name it yet. But soon she would. The days that followed the funeral blurred into a colorless stretch of awkward silences and unspoken judgments. Emily did her best to keep the twins occupied, filling their days with simple routines, meals, picture books, puzzles on a rug in their small upstairs room. They asked about their father in quiet moments, and she answered with gentleness, never breaking in front of them, though her heart ached with every word. Despite the grief, Emily held on to a single assumption, that Michael's family, for all their coldness, would at least offer stability until she could figure out her next move. She didn't expect kindness, but she believed in decency. After all, she was still Michael's wife, and Lily and Noah were their blood. That assumption, she would learn, was her greatest mistake. It happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the funeral. Emily had just finished dressing the twins when Victoria knocked on the bedroom door with a sharp rap. "Charles and I would like to speak with you downstairs," she said, not bothering to make eye contact. Emily felt a flicker of anxiety, but nodded. "Of course. I'll be down in a moment." She took a deep breath, told Lily and Noah to stay in their room with their toys, and walked downstairs, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't explain. They were waiting in the parlor, a room Emily had always avoided. It was full of antique furniture and colder than any other space in the house. Charles stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. Victoria was seated, a folder in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Please sit," Charles said curtly. Emily complied, folded her hands in her lap, unsure of what was about to unfold. "We'll get right to the point," Victoria began. "Now that the funeral is over, we've had some time to review matters." Emily blinked. "What matters?" "The house, the estate, the future of this family," Charles answered, stepping forward. "And frankly, it's time to be realistic." Emily's spine stiffened. "Realistic about what?" Victoria opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper. Michael did not leave a will, at least not one recognized by our attorney. As such, his assets revert to us as next of kin. Emily's heart began to race. "I'm his wife." Charles's lips thinned. "That doesn't change the fact that the house belongs to the Carter Family Trust. It always has. It was never Michael's to give." Emily tried to steady her voice. "What are you saying?" Victoria leaned forward. "We're saying it's time for you to leave, Emily. This arrangement was temporary. You and the children will need to find another place to stay." She stared at them, unable to speak. The words didn't make sense. They sounded rehearsed, legalistic, and completely devoid of compassion. "You can't be serious," she said finally. Charles shrugged. "We gave you 2 weeks. That was more than fair. You've had time to grieve and prepare." "Prepare?" Emily's voice cracked. "Prepare for what?" "You never said, Michael never said." "He didn't need to." Victoria cut in. "You're an intelligent woman. You must have known you weren't part of this family's long-term plans." The cruelty of the statement left Emily speechless. A cold sweat broke across her back as the room seemed to spin. "You can stay until the end of the week," Charles said, as if offering a great kindness. "But we expect you gone by Saturday." "Where am I supposed to go with 2 children?" she asked, her voice rising. "That's not our concern," Victoria replied, standing. "We've done our duty." Emily rose too, her hands trembling. "You're throwing us out. 2 weeks after he died, without a penny." "You are not entitled to a penny," Charles said flatly. "There was no will. And frankly, Michael's financial situation was not what you might think. There are debts, obligations." Emily stared at him. "He worked for your company. He ran your operations. He wasn't drowning in debt." Charles's eyes narrowed. "There are things you don't understand, and now is not the time to discuss them." She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She turned and walked out of the room, her legs numb, her throat burning. Back upstairs, she knelt before the twins, who looked up at her with wide, expectant eyes. "Mommy?" Lily asked, "What did Grandma want?" Emily forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're going to take a little trip, sweetie. A new adventure. Just us 3. She packed slowly that night, folding clothes into a single suitcase, trying to make decisions that made no sense. Where would they go? How long could she stretch what little money she had left? She thought about calling someone, but the list of people she could turn to was painfully short. By morning, she had made a few calls, tentative, embarrassed, hopeful. Most offered sympathy, none offered room, until one voice, softer than the rest, paused. "Emily? It's Julia, from Greenway Elementary." Julia Fields had been a teacher's aide when Emily taught part-time a few years ago. They had lost touch, but Julia still lived on the other side of town. "I don't have much space," Julia said, "but I've got a little guest room off the back. It's not fancy, but you and the kids can stay until you figure things out." Emily almost cried from relief. She left the Carter estate that afternoon. No one came to say goodbye. Charles wasn't home. Victoria stayed in her sunroom, sipping tea. A housekeeper handed Emily an envelope on the way out. Inside was a check for $1,000 and a note in Victoria's neat handwriting. For the children, good luck. She didn't take the money. Emily buckled the twins into their car seats, took one last look at the house she had lived in for 8 years, and drove away. No tears, no anger, just an overwhelming sense of displacement, as if she'd been cut loose from a world that had never truly wanted her. Julia's house was modest, tucked behind a row of apartment buildings near the train tracks. The guest room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a playpen, but it was warm, safe, and filled with kindness. Julia had stocked the fridge, left clean towels on the bed, and didn't ask questions. That night, after putting the twins to sleep, Emily sat in the dark with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with fear. She didn't know where her next paycheck would come from. She didn't know what had really happened to Michael's assets. And she didn't understand how everything had turned so cold so quickly. But one thing was clear. She was on her own now, completely. And the Carters had made one thing very, very clear. She was no longer welcome in the world she had once called home. Julia's guest room became both sanctuary and prison. The tiny space, barely wider than the bed and crib squeezed into it, held the essentials: safety, warmth, and a door that locked. But it wasn't home. Emily arranged a few toys she had brought into a neat pile at the corner of the room, trying to make the space less foreign for the twins. Each morning, she woke before sunrise, crept past the creaking hallway so as not to wake Julia, and sat alone in the small kitchen, staring at her laptop with a growing sense of desperation. Her savings had shriveled to less than $800. Job applications flew out every morning. Part-time teaching positions, tutoring gigs, customer service openings. But the replies, when they came, were always the same. We've chosen to move forward with another candidate. Without recent experience, and with the obvious complication of 2 children to care for, her chances were slim. She tried not to let the twins see her fear. During the day, she turned each walk to park, each peanut butter sandwich, each bedtime story into a moment of normalcy. But in the quiet hours after they fell asleep, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, calculating how many weeks of groceries she could buy if she skipped her own meals. Julia, always gentle, didn't press for details, but Emily could sense the question lingering. How long will you stay? On the 6th night, after putting Lily and Noah to bed, Emily sat at the kitchen table as Julia returned from her shift at the community center. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching Emily. "You don't have to tiptoe around me," Julia said softly. "I know things are rough." Emily looked up, weary. "I'm applying everything I can. I just need a little time." "I know," Julia replied, "and you're welcome here. But I also know this can't be your long-term plan." Emily nodded slowly. "It's not. I thought I'd have more time, or more options." Julia hesitated before speaking again. "Have you considered reaching out to Michael's attorney? There might be things you don't know, things I don't want you to know." Emily felt her chest tighten. "I don't have his contact information. I wouldn't even know where to start." Julia stepped away from the counter, rummaged through a drawer, and pulled out an old binder. She flipped through a few pages, then slid a card across the table. Richard Lowell. He handled a custody case for my cousin years ago. Said he used to work with corporate families. Maybe he knows the Carters, or can point you somewhere. Emily stared at the name. Something about it rang faintly familiar. She thanked Julia, tucked the card into her purse, and made a decision. The next morning, after dropping the twins off at a local daycare that offered subsidized temporary spots, she walked into a quiet corner cafe and called the number. A receptionist answered, professional and curt. "Lowell and Bennett. How may I direct your call?" Emily cleared her throat. "I'd like to speak with Richard Lowell. My name is Emily Carter. It's regarding my late husband, Michael Carter." A pause. Then, "Please hold." The silence stretched long enough to make her nervous. Finally, a calm male voice came on the line. "Mrs. Carter," the voice said, "I'm Richard Lowell. I wasn't expecting your call." Emily straightened in her seat. "I found your card. I didn't know who else to talk to. I need help." There was a subtle shift in his tone, professional but alert. I see. Well, perhaps we should meet in person. This isn't a conversation I'd like to have over the phone. When? She asked. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. My office is on Greenway Avenue. Come alone. Emily agreed, scribbled down the address, and ended the call, pulse racing. That night, she barely slept. Something about Richard's voice haunted her, measured, cautious, but hiding something beneath it. A truth? A warning? The next morning, she dressed carefully, left the twins with Julia, and took the bus across town. The law office was tucked between a dentist's office and a bookstore, the brass plaque on the door barely visible. Inside, the receptionist offered her a tight smile and led her to a private room with leather chairs and too much mahogany. Richard Lowell entered 5 minutes later. He was older than she expected, late 50s perhaps, with neatly combed gray hair and glasses he adjusted constantly. He extended a hand. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry for your loss. Emily sat down, not returning the pleasantries. You knew Michael? I did, for several years. Then you know what happened, she said. How his parents, how they've treated me. They said there was no will, that everything goes to them. Richard watched her carefully. That's one version of events. Emily leaned forward. I want the truth. Please. He hesitated. Then he opened the folder he had brought and placed a document on the table. This, he said slowly, is a copy of a draft will Michael brought to me for months before he died. It was meant to replace an older version that left most assets in the hands of his parents. Emily's breath caught. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the final version went missing, Richard said. The signed original was in my safe. After his death, it vanished. Emily stared at him. Stolen? I have no proof, he said. But I found my office broken into 2 days after Michael's funeral. Nothing else was taken, just the document. She shook her head. That can't be a coincidence. I agree, he replied. But without the original, the courts defer to the most recent verified version, and that one heavily favors Charles and Victoria Carter. Emily closed her eyes. But Michael wanted something else. Yes, Richard said. He intended to leave everything to you and the children, not just the assets, but guardianship protections. He was worried. Worried about what? Richard looked at her evenly. About what they might do to you. He knew his parents. He suspected they would act exactly as they have. Emily sat in stunned silence. There's more, Richard added. Michael mentioned a contingency, a backup plan, but he was vague, said he was handling something personally, something outside the legal channels. What does that mean? She asked. I don't know, he said, but if he followed through, there might still be a way to recover what he wanted for you. Emily leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. How do I find it? Richard shook his head. I wish I knew, but if you're serious about this, you'll need help, and you'll need to be discreet. The Carters aren't just powerful, they're connected, and they're not above manipulation. She looked him in the eye. I'm not afraid of them anymore. He nodded slowly. Then we begin. I'll make inquiries. Quiet ones. You start gathering anything Michael left behind. Notes, files, old emails. Anything he might have hidden. If there's a trail, we'll find it. Emily stood, a weight shifting inside her. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something stir beneath the fear. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. 2 days after their initial meeting, Richard Lowell contacted Emily with a simple message. Meet me at my office at 8 in the evening. Come alone. Bring anything of Michael's you still have. Emily read the message 3 times before replying. That morning, she had begun digging through the few boxes she had managed to salvage from the Carter estate. Most were filled with clothing, toys, and framed photos, memories more than information. But at the bottom of a weathered cardboard box, beneath Michael's college notebooks and some old tax forms, she found a small, zippered portfolio. Inside were several documents, none overtly incriminating, but one, in particular, caught her attention. A receipt from a storage unit rental on the edge of town, dated 5 months prior. She tucked it into her purse without a second thought. That evening, after ensuring the twins were safe with Julia, She returned to Richard's office. The building looked different at night, quieter, the hallway dimly lit and the receptionist absent. Richard opened the door himself. "Come in," he said, ushering her into a back conference room. "We won't be disturbed." Emily handed him the portfolio and watched as he methodically reviewed its contents. When he reached the storage unit receipt, he paused. "Where'd you find this?" he asked, his tone shifting. "In one of Michael's boxes. It was buried under some of his personal things." Richard studied the paper. "This is a name I recognize. Blue Horizon Storage. It's not local. It's in Middletown," Emily said. "About an hour from here." He nodded slowly. Odd choice for a man who lived 15 minutes from 2 other facilities. "Do you think this could be what he meant by his backup plan?" she asked. Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed the receipt aside and focused his gaze on her. "Tell me exactly what happened the day after Michael died. Every conversation you had with Charles and Victoria. Every detail." Emily recounted the days following the accident. The lack of support, the icy distance, the rapid descent into isolation. When she reached the moment they told her to leave the estate, Richard's face tightened. "They were waiting," he muttered. "They moved too quickly. That level of coordination doesn't happen in 2 weeks. They must have had access to his financial accounts almost immediately. And for that to happen, they needed someone on the inside. You think someone helped them?" "I bet my license on it. Possibly someone in my own firm." Emily blinked. "You think your office was compromised?" He sighed. "After Michael's funeral, the break-in at my office wasn't just sloppy. It was precise. No drawers rifled, no equipment taken, just a safe. They knew exactly what they were looking for." Her stomach turned. "Then whoever took the will probably already knows I'm talking to you, which is why we proceed carefully," he said. "Do not discuss this with anyone. Not Julia, not your friends, and especially not anyone remotely connected to the Carters." "I understand." Richard slid the storage receipt back across the table. "You're going to Middletown. I'll give you the legal clearance in case anyone questions the unit. If there's anything of value there, documents, recordings, anything, bring it to me, but be cautious. Don't assume you're alone." She took the paper with a trembling hand. "Should I go alone?" "I think it's safer if you do," he replied. "Take a burner phone. Leave your regular one at home. Do not let this lead trail back to you, not yet." The next morning, Emily left the twins with Julia and took a rented car south along the highway. Her real phone powered off and hidden in her closet. The address on the receipt led her to a narrow stretch of industrial road lined with storage facilities and auto repair shops. Blue Horizon Storage sat at the far end, surrounded by a chain-link fence and guarded by a single keypad entry gate. She entered the unit number and access code. The gate clicked open. The unit, number 87, was unremarkable, just a metal door with a heavy latch. When she opened it, a wave of cold, musty air escaped. The space inside was small, cluttered with 2 plastic bins, a locked briefcase, and what looked like a home safe bolted to the concrete floor. She examined the bins first. The first held old laptops, external drives, and piles of documents. The second was filled with children's drawings, old gifts, and a few of Michael's personal journals. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Scrawled notes, sketches of potential business plans, and lists of tasks that at first seemed meaningless. But then she spotted it, an entry circled 3 times. RL, confirm meeting. Backup video ready. Transfer to secure drive by Thursday. Lock and safe. RL, Richard Lowell. She turned to the briefcase, heart racing. It had no label, but the combination lock gave way after a few attempts. Inside were neatly stacked USB drives, a small camcorder, and a sealed envelope marked only with her name. Her breath caught, hands trembling. She opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. "Emily, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I don't know how much you'll find or how long it'll take. But if you've made it here, you've already done more than I could have asked. My parents, I didn't want to believe they would go this far, but I saw it coming. The way they looked at you, the way they talked when they thought I wasn't listening. I didn't trust them. I didn't trust the people around me either, not all of them. So I did what I could. This drive holds everything. Proof of the new will, yes, but also proof of what they were planning. I recorded everything. Conversations, meetings, contracts. It's all here. Take this to Richard. He'll know what to do. And Emily, protect the twins. No matter what. Michael, she sat there in stunned silence, tears forming but never falling. Then, without hesitating, she packed everything into the briefcase, closed the unit, and left as quietly as she had arrived. Back at Richard's office that evening, she handed him the case. He opened it with solemn expression, quickly scanning the contents. He looked up at her. This changes everything. What happens now? She asked. We go to court, he said. But not yet. First, I verify everything. I check for tampering. I log chain of custody. We do this by the book. Because once we move, they'll come at you harder than before. I'm ready, she said. He nodded, closing the briefcase. Then let's begin. 3 days after Emily delivered the briefcase to Richard, she received a call just after dawn. The twins were still asleep, the apartment cloaked in the gentle quiet of early morning. She answered the phone with a whisper. Hello, it's Richard. I need you to come in immediately. There was urgency in his voice, the kind that replaced all pleasantries. Emily was at the office 40 minutes later. The reception area was empty, and the blinds in the hallway were closed. Richard met her at the door to the conference room and didn't waste time with small talk. On the table were printed documents, a laptop, and one of the USB drives she had retrieved from the storage unit. I reviewed the footage. The camcorder held over 3 hours of video. Michael recorded 2 conversations with Charles and Victoria that are, he paused, as if searching for the right word, revealing. He clicked play on the laptop. The video was grainy but clear. Michael's voice came first, calm but firm. Across from him, seated in the family's drawing room, were his parents. You don't need to involve her, he said in the video. Emily is not part of this. Victoria responded, her voice sharp. She is part of this the moment she marries into this family. You're too emotional to see it, Michael. She is the mother of your grandchildren. And they'll be fine, Charles interjected. But you need to be realistic about succession, about the company, about what happens if something happens to you. Michael had stared at them, visibly disgusted. You're talking like I'm already gone. That's because we're planning for the future, with or without your cooperation. The video paused. Richard looked up at Emily. That was recorded 3 weeks before his death. He had already drafted a new will. He told them explicitly that the company and his assets would go to you and the children. Their response was to start maneuvering behind his back. Emily swallowed. They knew he had changed the will. Richard nodded. They tried to pressure him into reversing it. When that failed, they began what I believe was a campaign to discredit him, subtle, quiet, but building a narrative that he was unstable, unfit, under pressure. It's possible they were preparing to challenge the new, well, even before he died. Emily's jaw clenched. And when he died, they moved fast, because they had to, but they missed something. He handed her a single page, neatly typed and bearing Michael's digital signature. What is this? She asked. It's a supplementary clause Michael filed digitally, not with the main will, but as an independent document. It specifies that in the event of his death, any and all updates not yet processed into the final testament are to be interpreted in favor of the most recent statements of intent, particularly regarding guardianship and inheritance. Emily stared at it. And this holds up in court? It should, Richard said, especially now that we can prove he intended to finalize the amended will. This clause is your bridge. It connects the old document to his true intentions. She felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. So, what do we do? Richard leaned forward. We use this, along with the footage and the contents of the briefcase. We file a motion to contest the probate ruling. But we need to act carefully. The Carters have already registered the estate under their names. Reversing that process is going to take strategy and strength. Emily's thoughts jumped ahead. What about the children? Custody? That's the part they're moving on now, he said, opening another folder. They've filed a petition in family court to declare you emotionally unstable and unfit for custody. A social worker will likely be visiting you soon. Emily's stomach dropped. They're trying to take my children. Richard's voice lowered. Yes, and they'll use every resource they have to do it. The air in the room thickened. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, but she remained still. Then I need someone who knows how to fight them. Richard paused, then pulled out a business card and slid across the table. Grace Mendel. She's young but tenacious. She's not afraid of powerful families, and she's made a name for herself representing single mothers in high-stakes custody battles. I've already spoken with her. She's expecting your call. Emily picked up the card and nodded slowly. Then I guess it's time to stop reacting. Richard looked at her. Exactly. It's time to take the fight to them. Later that day, Emily called Grace Mendel and set an appointment for the next morning. The attorney's office was located in a modest building in downtown Dayton, wedged between a tax preparation center and a Vietnamese bakery. Grace was in her early 30s with short, tightly curled hair and eyes that studied people like a hawk sizing up a challenge. "You're Emily Carter," she said as they shook hands. "I've been waiting to meet you." Emily was struck by her confidence. Grace gestured toward a chair. "Tell me everything, and don't hold back." Emily did. She explained the eviction, the missing will, the storage unit, the video recordings, and now the custody threat. Grace listened silently, taking notes in a thick leather-bound notebook. When Emily finished, the attorney leaned back and smiled without amusement. "They're coming at you with everything, but you're not defenseless anymore." Emily exhaled. "Can we stop them?" Grace nodded. "Yes, but this won't be clean. They're laying the groundwork to paint you as unstable. You'll need to be perfect. That means documentation, daily journals, testimony from people close to you, and no outbursts, no public scenes. They'll try to provoke you." "I understand," Emily said. "Good, because this is going to get uglier before it gets better. But I've taken down men like Charles Carter before. They always underestimate the woman they're trying to erase." Emily's eyes sharpened. Let them try. That afternoon, Grace began drafting a counterpetition in family court, one that not only contested the Carters' motion, but introduced evidence suggesting their actions constituted manipulation, coercion, and psychological harassment. Meanwhile, Richard began preparing the legal challenge to the probate court, armed now with Michael's forgotten clause and the supporting documents from the storage unit. But even as they moved forward, the Carters were already adapting. That evening, Julia returned home visibly upset. "You got a visit today," she said to Emily. "Who?" "Someone claiming to be from Child Protective Services. She asked about your mental state, if the children seemed well cared for, if there had been any recent signs of instability." Emily's hands curled into fists. "She didn't find anything," Julia said quickly. "I told her the truth, that you're doing everything for your kids, that you're stable, calm, and kind. But Emily, this was just a warning shot." Emily nodded grimly. "Then it's time we start firing back." She no longer doubted the road ahead. It would be hard, ruthless, but Michael had trusted her to protect their children, to fight for what was right. And with allies by her side, the war was just beginning. 2 weeks after Grace filed the counterpetition and Richard initiated the probate challenge, the Carters launched a new offensive. It began with a carefully timed article in the Millfield Gazette, the town's most widely read local newspaper. The headline ran in bold, black print across the front page: "Widow of Michael Carter facing mental health concerns. Say family sources." Emily found the newspaper folded on Julia's front porch early one morning. The sight of her own name in print made her stomach turn, but what followed made her blood run cold. The article referenced anonymous, close family members expressing concern for the well-being of Michael's widow and children. It spoke of Emily's increasing instability since the funeral, her erratic behavior, and financial desperation. There were vague implications that she had neglected the twins, that she was isolating herself from the community, and that even former friends were growing concerned. There were no direct quotes, no evidence, Just insinuations. Julia walked into the kitchen as Emily stood frozen, reading the article in silence. "I saw it this morning," Julia said. "They're laying a trap, trying to shape public opinion before the court dates." Emily clenched the paper in her hands. "It's a smear campaign, and it's just the beginning," Julia added. "They're trying to make you look dangerous, unfit." By noon, the article had spread beyond Millfield. Local blogs and Facebook pages began reposting it. A small talk radio show even aired a segment speculating about Emily's unpredictable behavior. A photo of her, taken outside the courthouse, circulated with the caption, "Grieving widow or unstable threat?" Emily didn't leave the house for the next 2 days. Not out of fear, but strategy. Grace warned her that any emotional response, any public confrontation, would be used against her. Instead, they documented everything. They printed every online article, recorded the radio segment, and saved screenshots of the comments. "We're building a counter-narrative," Grace explained. "Their accusations are vague and unsubstantial, but we're going to respond with facts, testimony, and evidence, starting with the school." Emily looked up. "Greenway Elementary?" Grace nodded. "Michael used to volunteer there. You taught there. And I'm guessing at least a few of your colleagues would be willing to speak on your behalf." That afternoon, Emily met with the school principal, a gentleman named Mr. Harmon. He remembered both Emily and Michael, and after hearing the situation, agreed to write a formal statement of character. Several former co-workers followed suit. Meanwhile, Richard received a tip from a contact in the county records office. The Carters had submitted a formal request to expedite the custody hearing, citing urgent concerns for the children's welfare. They included letters from a private psychiatrist and a family consultant, both of whom had never met Emily. The psychiatrist's letter referenced potential postpartum trauma exacerbated by sudden bereavement and recommended a temporary change in custody, pending further evaluation. Emily sat in Grace's office with the letter trembling in her hands. "This is fiction," she said. "They're manufacturing diagnoses." Grace looked furious. "And they're trying to put the burden on you to disprove them. But we're not going to play by their script." She called in a licensed child psychologist, an independent expert who agreed to visit Emily's temporary home and meet with the twins. After 2 sessions, the psychologist submitted a sworn affidavit to the court stating that both Lily and Noah were well cared for, emotionally stable, and securely attached to their mother. "It's not just a good report," Grace said, placing the affidavit in a binder. "It's a shield, and it's admissible." Still, the pressure didn't let up. One afternoon, while picking up the twins from the daycare center, Emily noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The next day, it was there again, and the day after that, Julia began noticing the same vehicle when taking the twins for walks. The man behind the wheel never exited the car, never approached them, but his presence was deliberate. When Emily told Richard, his response was immediate. "That's intimidation," he said. "Subtle but effective. It's meant to rattle you. But it also tells us they're worried. They're watching you because they're unsure what you'll do next." "I want it documented," Emily said, "every day, every hour." So she began logging the appearances. Julia took photos. Grace filed a complaint with the court, attaching the documentation and requesting a restraining order if the surveillance continued. Though the court took no immediate action, it placed the Carters on notice. They responded by escalating. One morning, Emily received a letter from a law firm she didn't recognize. It contained a cease and desist order demanding that she refrain from speaking to former employees of Carter Enterprises, citing a non-disclosure agreement supposedly signed by Michael during his tenure. The letter claimed that Emily's inquiries into the company's finances, personnel, and internal policies constituted a breach of legal and ethical boundaries. Emily took the letter straight to Richard. "It's another bluff," he said, "designed to scare you into silence. But Michael's NDA, if it exists, doesn't apply to you. And even if it did, it can't be used to conceal wrongdoing. We're not backing off." But the intimidation tactics began to take a toll. Emily found herself double-checking locks, peering out windows late at night. The twins, though cheerful during the day, began waking up more frequently in the middle of the night. Once, Lily asked if the man in the car was going to take them away. Emily reassured her, holding her close, fighting back tears. In response, Grace pushed for a preliminary hearing, not to argue the full case yet, but to address the tactics the Carters were using. Their strategy is transparent, Grace told the judge in court. They are attempting to harass, intimidate, and discredit my client through media manipulation and fabricated concerns. We request that the court acknowledge these actions and take appropriate steps to ensure a fair and just proceeding. Charles and Victoria Carter, sitting stiffly on the opposite bench, didn't react. The judge didn't issue any immediate sanctions, but allowed Grace to submit all documentation formally into the case record. More importantly, he scheduled the official custody hearing and allowed Grace to submit a motion for partial discovery, including communications from Carter Enterprises that might pertain to Michael's revised will. It was a small but crucial victory. As they left the courthouse, Emily turned to Grace. They're coming at us from every angle. They have money, connections, media control, and we have truth, Grace replied. They're trying to silence you, but it's not working. Every time they push, we push back harder, and people are starting to notice. Emily felt it too. The tide was beginning to shift, slowly, quietly, but the cracks in the Carter facade were starting to show, and she would be ready when they shattered. 3 weeks before the scheduled custody hearing, Emily received a sealed envelope via certified mail. Inside was a formal notice that Charles and Victoria Carter had hired a new legal team, one of the most prestigious and aggressive family law firms in the state. Attached to the letter was a subpoena requesting a full disclosure of Emily's financial records, employment history, psychological evaluations, and correspondence related to Michael's estate. It was a strategic maneuver designed not only to delay, but to overwhelm. Grace, already anticipating the escalation, immediately filed a counter-motion. But it was clear the Carters were no longer operating from behind the curtain. They were stepping into the courtroom with full force, and their strategy was simple: bury Emily under the weight of litigation, force her into a mistake, and capitalize on it. That same afternoon, Richard called with new developments. His digital forensic team had finished analyzing the contents of the USB drives and discovered something unexpected: a digitally signed copy of Michael's revised will, encrypted but intact. The signature was verified through a blockchain timestamping service Michael had quietly subscribed to months before his death, a move that left an unalterable record of when and by whom the document was signed. "This," Richard said during an emergency meeting with Emily and Grace, "is our insurance. Even if the physical document never turns up, this digital version is admissible. With the added testimony of witnesses, we can challenge the Carter's version head-on." Grace studied the file carefully, her expression sharpening with purpose. "Then it's time we get our witness." She was referring to a name mentioned briefly in Michael's notes: Tyler Jennings, a former executive assistant at Carter Enterprises, who had worked closely with Michael during the final year of his life. According to Richard, Tyler had been terminated without cause just 2 weeks after Michael's death. Emily and Grace tracked him down to a rental apartment on the outskirts of Columbus. He was hesitant to speak at first, visibly nervous and reluctant to get involved. "They've got long arms," he told them. "They ruin people. You don't know what they're capable of." Emily leaned forward. "I do know. They threw me and my children out of our home 2 weeks after Michael died. They've tried to declare me unfit. They planted stories. They stalked me, but I'm still here. And I need someone who can help prove what my husband wanted before they erase it completely." Tyler hesitated, then nodded slowly. He showed me the updated will. I watched him sign it. I even helped him encrypt it. He was paranoid. Said he didn't trust the paper trail. Grace's eyes narrowed. "Would you be willing to testify to that in court?" There was a long silence before Tyler exhaled. "Yes, I'll do it." With Tyler's sworn affidavit and the blockchain-verified digital will, Grace filed a motion to enter new evidence into the probate dispute. The court scheduled a pre-hearing to determine the admissibility of the digital will, a critical step that could shift the entire case. Meanwhile, the pressure continued to mount. Emily began receiving calls from unfamiliar numbers at all hours. Sometimes no one spoke. Sometimes a voice warned her to think about her kids. Once, Julia found a dead bird left on the front steps of the house. Grace responded by pushing for a restraining order not only against the Carters, but also against unknown associates acting on their behalf. The court granted a temporary protection order, which forbade any contact, direct or indirect, from Charles, Victoria, or anyone affiliated with Carter Enterprises. Violations would be treated as contempt of court. The small victory added a layer of protection, but also deepened the sense that every move was being watched. The Carters, despite their outward composure, were losing control and reacting like cornered predators. To strengthen their case further, Grace hired a private investigator named Dominic Reyes, a former police detective with a reputation for exposing corruption in high-profile corporate families. Within days, Dominic uncovered something that neither Richard nor Emily had anticipated: a series of wire transfers from Carter Enterprises to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, starting 1 week after Michael's funeral. The amounts totaled nearly $5 million. That's embezzlement, Richard said, examining the reports. They're moving assets, possibly in anticipation of losing control of the estate. Emily felt the air tighten in the room. If they're hiding money, does that mean they think they've already lost? No, Grace replied. It means they're preparing for what comes after. But we're going to cut them off before they get the chance. Armed with the new evidence, Grace scheduled depositions for 3 key Carter executives, 2 of whom were directly involved in the company's financial operations. Under oath, they denied any knowledge of the transfers. But Dominic's documentation painted a different picture. One of the executives, when confronted with the evidence, requested a private recess, then returned and recanted his statement. I was told to stay quiet, he said. Victoria handled the transfers, said it was a contingency in case of complications. The statement, captured in a signed transcript, became another cornerstone in Emily's legal arsenal. Still, the Carters remained publicly confident. 2 days before the pre-hearing, Victoria was interviewed on a regional business news segment. Dressed impeccably and speaking in measured tones, she painted Emily as a grieving woman who unfortunately lost her way and expressed concern for the emotional well-being of her grandchildren. I only want what's best for them, she said to the camera, and I fear Emily is not well enough to see clearly anymore. When the segment aired, Grace was already drafting a motion for defamation. She wants the court to see her as composed, generous, and concerned, Grace said, but will expose the truth behind performance. The day of the pre-hearing arrived under a gray, drizzling sky. Emily stood outside the courthouse, dressed in a navy suit and holding a leather folder that contained copies of the digital will, Tyler's affidavit, and the forensic report. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Charles and Victoria sat with their legal team, stoic and unreadable. Across from them, Grace stood beside Emily, documents neatly aligned, her tone steady and precise. Our motion, Grace began, is to allow this court to consider new evidence, a digitally signed and encrypted version of the deceased's final testament, verified through blockchain authentication and supported by the sworn testimony of a direct witness. The Carter attorney objected, claiming questionable chain of custody and potential tampering. But Richard countered with the digital forensics report. After nearly an hour of legal sparring, the judge issued his decision. The court finds a digital version of Mr. Michael Carter's will to be admissible for consideration in the probate proceedings. Further, the court will hear testimony from Mr. Tyler Jennings in the upcoming hearing. Grace turned to Emily with a slight nod. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a significant step forward. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, microphones poised. Emily, do you have a comment on today's decision? She paused only briefly before answering. Yes, I do. She looked straight into the camera, her voice unwavering. I'm not afraid of the truth, and I won't stop until my children are safe and my husband's wishes are honored. It was no longer a defensive stance. The fight had begun, and this time, Emily was the one leading it. The morning of the official probate hearing arrived, cloaked in a fog that hung low over the courthouse steps. Emily stood outside the courtroom in silence, her fingers wrapped tightly around a small gold locket Michael had given her years earlier. It had been a wedding gift, etched with the initials E+M on the back. She had worn it every day since his death. visible proof, at least to herself, that something of him still protected her. Inside the courtroom, the gallery filled quickly. Members of the press occupied the back rows, notebooks in hand, while legal clerks and a few Carter employees sat toward the front, eyes fixed on the legal teams preparing for the most anticipated hearing the town had seen in years. Grace, composed and meticulous as always, reviewed her final notes beside Emily. On the other side, the Carters' new attorney, a stern man named Gregory Pike, shuffled through binders and whispered directions to Charles and Victoria. Neither of them acknowledged Emily. At 10 o'clock sharp, the judge entered, and the room fell into absolute stillness. We are here today to hear arguments regarding the validity of a revised last will and testament allegedly authored by the late Michael Carter, as well as the integrity of the original probate filing. Counsel may proceed. Grace rose and began, her tone firm and paced. Your Honor, the petitioner, Emily Carter, brings forth new material evidence, including a digitally signed and time-stamped version of Mr. Carter's revised will. This document explicitly allocates his estate to his wife and children and is accompanied by corroborated witness testimony and forensic validation. The integrity of this evidence speaks to Michael Carter's final wishes and reveals clear intent to update the prior testament filed by the respondents, Charles and Victoria Carter. Pike stood next, voice smooth but dismissive. Your Honor, the respondents contest not the grief of the widow, but the credibility of her claims. The document in question, while presented as legitimate, lacks physical form and was not notarized. We maintain that the previous will, fully signed and witnessed, remains the only legal testament. The judge raised a hand. This court recognizes the admissibility of digital documentation when supported by forensic validation. Proceed with the first witness. Tyler Jennings was called to the stand. He took his oath, cleared his throat, and began. I was Michael Carter's executive assistant for a year and a half. I was present when he finalized the revisions to his will. He asked me to assist with the encryption and witnessed his digital signature on the night of April 12th. He told me explicitly that he no longer trusted his parents to carry out his wishes. Pike approached with measured skepticism. Mr. Jennings, were you compensated in any way for your testimony today? No, Tyler said. In fact, I was fired without explanation shortly after Michael's funeral. Perhaps due performance? Tyler didn't flinch. No, I believe it was because I knew too much. The courtroom murmured. The judge called for order. Next, Grace introduced a forensic expert who walked the court through the blockchain timestamp, the encryption metadata, and the unique digital signature linking the revised will directly to Michael Carter's personal credentials. The presentation was meticulous and technical, and by the end of it, the judge's posture had shifted slightly forward. Interested, not yet convinced, but certainly not dismissive. Then it was time for the Carters' rebuttal. Victoria rose to speak. Not her attorney. Her. She walked to the witness stand with careful precision, every inch of her posture rehearsed. Once sworn in, her voice softened into what could almost be mistaken for vulnerability. My son was under immense stress in his final months. He feared legal battles, was reclusive, erratic. We were deeply concerned for his mental health. While I do not doubt his love for Emily, I question whether decisions made in that time reflected a clear and stable state of mind. Grace stood. Mrs. Carter, are you a licensed medical professional? No. Have you ever seen a diagnosis from a qualified psychiatrist stating that your son was mentally unfit? No, but... Then your opinion, while no doubt sincere, holds no weight in this court. Thank you. Victoria's jaw tightened as she stepped down. Her brief moment of emotional appeal had failed to land. Then, as the judge prepared to close the session, Gregory Pike stood again. Your Honor, before proceedings conclude, the respondents would like to submit new testimony. A witness who has only recently come forward. A former employee of Carter Enterprises. Grace leaned toward Emily, whispering, Who? The courtroom doors opened, and a man in his late 30s walked in. He wore a dark gray suit, hair slicked back, eyes downcast. This is Simon Krause, Pike announced, a former accountant for the Carter family business. He has testimony regarding the petitioner's behavior following Mr. Carter's death. Grace stood immediately. Your Honor, this is a last-minute witness. We've had no opportunity to review his statements or verify his credentials. The judge considered. Given the gravity of the case, the court will allow brief testimony, but we will reconvene if further cross-examination is needed. Simon took the stand. His voice was quiet, but carried across the room. About a week after Michael passed, I saw Emily at the office. She demanded access to Michael's financial accounts. She was frantic, aggressive. She said she was entitled to everything, that she didn't care what the family thought. Emily's face went pale. That's a lie, she said under her breath. Grace objected. Your Honor, we request time to investigate this testimony. It directly contradicts all known records. There is no documentation placing my client at Carter Enterprises after her husband's death. The judge nodded. Mr. Krause, do you have any evidence to support your claim? Simon hesitated. I didn't file a report, but I remember the incident clearly. Grace folded her arms. No reports, no security footage, no witnesses. Convenient. She turned to the judge. We believe this is fabricated. But Pike had made his move. A seed of doubt had been planted. After recess, Grace pulled Emily aside. He was coached, probably paid, but we can't prove it yet. Do you think the judge believes him? Emily asked. Grace was quiet for a moment. I think the judge believes there's more to uncover. The hearing concluded with the judge stating that he would review all submitted evidence and reconvene within 10 days for a ruling on the legitimacy of the digital will. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, but this time, Emily didn't stop. That night, she sat with Julia in the dim kitchen, the twins asleep upstairs. They won't stop, Emily said. Even when they're losing, they lie. They invent people. Julia poured her tea. That just means you're winning. People only cheat when the truth isn't on their side. Emily looked down at her hands. I just want it to end. For them to stop attacking my kids. For Michael to be remembered for who he was. Julia reached across the table. Her voice gentle but certain. Then keep fighting. Because no matter what they throw at you next, you've already come further than they ever thought you would. And Emily knew she was right. The next battle was already coming. But now, the court had heard Michael's voice, his digital signature, his final decision, and the Carter's version of the truth was starting to crack. A blurred September afternoon found Emily at the courthouse once more, this time for the rescheduled hearing on the digital will's legitimacy. The silence in the courtroom felt charged with everything that had transpired, the mounting tension, the allegations, the relentless pressure. But underneath it, Emily sensed something stronger, a shift, subtle but undeniable, in how the narrative was unfolding. The Carters' grip on their version of the story had begun to loosen. Cracks were emerging. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, Grace met discreetly with Dominic Reyes, the private investigator. He slid a manila envelope across a small cafe table they shared. Got something, he said, lowering his voice. Old bank records, security logs. They cleared them out. Inside the envelope, Grace found a set of surveillance snapshots and receipts linked to a private vault at the First National Bank of Cincinnati. The records showed that Michael had rented a second private vault just days before the storage unit Michael had arranged at Blue Horizon. This vault was in the bank's high-security underground area, accessible only with biometric ID and dual authorization. Emily looked at the images. Michael entering the secure lobby, a bank clerk placing a thumbprint, and I scan. Dates were precise. The final one came just 3 days before he died. Grace leaned over the table. He planned this meticulously. The storage unit was obvious, but the vault, that was the real fallback. Emily's breath caught. So everything you wanted to protect, including legal documents, recordings, maybe even original copies of testimony, could be in that vault. Dominic nodded. The bank records show only one access after his death. I can't say who went in, but they were in and out in under 3 minutes. Emily realized with a shock that the Carters, or someone working for them, must have known about it and retrieved whatever Michael had hidden there. Grace closed the folder. We need that vault. We need to know what's inside, and whether anything's missing. They turned the evidence over to Richard, who arranged a legal subpoena to the bank for access logs, contents indexing, and any surveillance footage of the vault. 2 days later, Richard returned with updates. The bank contested on grounds of privacy rules and security protocols, but under court order, compiled an inventory list identifying items in the vault. Several secured boxes labeled only with codes and one sealed envelope marked for Emily and children. The access log showed that after Michael's death, someone using Michael's credentials, biometric scan and code, entered once. Then another accessed 2 days later by an unknown person. Surveillance footage captured only a gloved hand opening the vault. Grace filed an emergency motion with the court, compelled bank to produce the video footage for in-camera review and preserve the vault contents, pending further judicial order. The judge agreed. Guardianship of the vault was placed under a court-appointed trustee to ensure no tampering. Emily's heart pounded when she learned about the sealed envelope. To think that Michael had deliberately placed something there. In that vault, for her and their children, sealed to protection, was overwhelming. Days turned into an agonizing wait. Emily found no peace. Every quiet moment, she thought of the unknown content of that envelope. The sanctuary Michael had tried to create beneath the city, a fortress of evidence and love he may never have meant to open himself. When the court finally scheduled the vault examination, Emily, Grace, Richard, Tyler, and Dominic were allowed access, accompanied by the trustee and a court-appointed forensic examiner. The trustee carefully handed Emily the sealed envelope. Her hands trembled as she accepted it. They moved into a private room in the bank's secure floor. Watches stopped. Phones off. The forensic examiner verified the envelope's seal hadn't been broken. Emily took a deep breath and opened it in their presence. Inside was a small stack of letter-sized papers bound by an old ribbon and a compact USB drive labeled Emily plus Michael. The letters were handwritten, Michael's careful scrawl, and contained personal messages, protection plans, life insurance details, and guardianship appointments. One letter stood out, addressed to my beloved Emily. If you're reading this, explaining how everything even he couldn't control, trusts, guardianships, documents invisible to legal systems, eyewitness video records, financial transfers to accessible trusts, had been secured and stored safe. And the USB contained a full video. Michael speaking in his study, naming Emily as personal executor, addressing his concerns about the Carters, and explaining where additional keys and code words could be found. Emily felt the world shift as she watched the footage. His voice, warm, composed, loving, filled the room. He ended with, "No matter what they say, know that this was always yours. You and our babies." Tears welled up, and for a moment, Emily let herself cry, right there among the silent witnesses. She gathered herself and turned to Grace. "We have what we need. His voice, his plan, his protection." Grace nodded, eyes shining. This is it, the final, irrefutable proof. In the following days, they presented the vault contents to both probate and family courts. Physical letters, video footage, and digital files. The court officially recognized that Michael had anticipated every loophole. The sealed envelope from the vault became the linchpin, proof that it had gone beyond legal documents, securing his intentions in ways the Carters couldn't erase or manipulate. When Charles and Victoria's legal team reviewed the new evidence, they knew the game was over. The judge issued a summary decision. Michael's revised will upheld, guardianship reserved to Emily, and all assets to be released as directed in his instructions, including trusts and accounts previously hidden. Emily stepped outside the courthouse that day with the twins in her arms. Cameras flashed, but she didn't stop to speak. She simply hugged them, breathed in their warmth, and felt, at last, safe. Her husband's legacy had been restored and her family reclaimed. The courthouse was more crowded than ever. News of the sealed envelope and the vault evidence had made headlines across the state, and the final hearing was now a matter of public interest. The tension inside the courtroom was palpable, a dense fog of expectation that wrapped itself around every conversation and every footstep on the polished floor. Emily sat beside Grace and Richard at the petitioner's table, her hands resting calmly in her lap. This time, She wore no jewelry, no bright colors, just a modest gray suit and the same quiet strength that had carried her through every twist of the legal battle. Behind her, Julia sat with the twins, both of them drawing quietly, unaware of the storm unfolding around them. Across the room, Charles and Victoria Carter sat rigid, surrounded by a shrinking legal team. Their lead counsel, Gregory Pike, had changed his tone since the release of the vault evidence. There were no more smug glances, no underhanded comments, only silence and occasional whispers among themselves as they shuffled through paperwork they now knew wouldn't save them. The judge entered promptly at 9 o'clock, his face unreadable. This court is convened for the final hearing regarding the contested estate of Michael Carter and the associated guardianship dispute. All parties present, all exhibits reviewed. We will hear closing statements before rendering a decision. Grace rose with practiced ease. Your Honor, this case is not only about inheritance or financial control. It is about the deliberate attempt to erase a man's final will, to sever a mother from her children, and to manipulate the legal system through intimidation and deceit. She walked slowly, her voice unwavering. We have presented video testimony recorded by Michael Carter himself, expressing not only his love for his wife and children, but also his precise intentions regarding his estate and the dangers he feared from his own family. We have shown forensic evidence validating the digital will. We have heard testimony from a direct witness to its signing. And we have uncovered covert financial movements designed to conceal assets, actions that, if not exposed, would have permanently deprived his rightful heirs of their legacy. She paused. The Carters attempted to paint Emily as unstable, incapable, even dangerous. But every action she has taken, every step, has been to protect her children and honor her husband's memory. The truth is no longer hidden. It is documented, recorded, and now it must be recognized. She returned to her seat. The room remained quiet. Then Pike rose, no longer with the confidence of weeks prior. Your Honor, the respondents acknowledged the materials presented, but we maintain that there are questions surrounding the intent and mental fitness of Michael Carter at the time of these revisions. It is our position that such late-stage alterations should be viewed with caution, given the potential for undue influence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Pike, your clients were previously accused of attempting to discredit the petitioner through falsified psychiatric claims and fabricated testimony. Is that not correct? Pike hesitated. The defense does not concede those points, but acknowledges that, upon further review, certain submissions were inadequately vetted. Grace leaned toward Emily and whispered, "That's legal code for we're losing." The judge turned toward Charles and Victoria. Would either of you like to address the court before I issue a ruling? For the first time, Charles stood. His expression was calm, but his voice was brittle. Your Honor, everything we did, right or wrong, was for good of the family, for the preservation of what Michael built. We believe that Emily might not be able to handle it. His words echoed off the courtroom walls like a final breath before collapse. Victoria remained seated, her eyes locked on the bench. She said nothing. The judge nodded, looked down at his notes, then spoke. This court has reviewed extensive documentation, video evidence, testimony, and expert analysis. The revise was submitted by the petitioner, digitally signed, verified by blockchain encryption, and supported by multiple corroborating sources. It is upheld as the final, legally binding testament of Michael Carter. He continued, this court further finds that Charles and Victoria Carter engaged in actions intended to obstruct justice, including the unauthorized removal of private legal documents, intimidation of witnesses, and unsubstantiated claims against the petitioner's character. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. In light of these findings, the court recognizes Emily Carter as the sole executor of Michael Carter's estate and grants her full custodial guardianship of Lily and Noah Carter, effective immediately. Emily closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just exhaled, a long, deep breath that released every held-back moment of fear. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of asset concealment and attempted fraud to the county district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Charles looked like a statue cracking at the edges. Victoria's fingers tightened on the handle of her handbag, but she still didn't speak. Reporters leapt from their benches the moment the gavel fell. Questions flew through the air. Microphones rushed toward Emily, but she didn't stop. She took her children's hands, thanked the bailiff quietly, and walked out courtroom without saying a word. In the hallway, Grace turned to her, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You did it!" Emily shook her head. "We did it!" Richard joined them, holding a thick file of closing documents. "The estate is officially yours. Every account, every trust, every asset. And I think Michael will be proud of how you fought for all of it." Emily looked down at Lily and Noah, who were now smiling, unaware how close they had come to losing everything. "I didn't fight for the money," she said. "I fought because he believed in me. And because no one gets to take that away, not even his parents." They left the courthouse together, stepping out into the early afternoon light. The weight that had clung to Emily for months began to lift. She wasn't a frightened widow anymore. She was something else now, something stronger. And while the legal battle was over, she knew her work had only just begun. Less than a week after the final ruling, the investigation against Charles and Victoria Carter was officially opened by the district attorney's office. The decision had been swift, fueled by the documentation Grace and Richard had meticulously compiled throughout the probate battle. Financial irregularities, falsified reports, and witness intimidation now formed the basis of a criminal inquiry that no amount of wealth or reputation could deflect. The media, once divided in its coverage of the case, now closed on the Carters like a pack of wolves. Headlines ran across major news outlets: heirs of empire under investigation, justice for the Carter widow, court rules in shocking reversal of estate battle. Talk shows speculated endlessly, not just about the criminal charges, but about what would become the once revered Carter family legacy. Inside Carter Enterprises, the shift was seismic. Shareholders began calling emergency meetings. Several board members resigned. The company's stock, once stable and respected, began to plummet as news of the investigation spread. Emily received a confidential email from a longtime employee she had never met, thanking her. "I thought we were all stuck under their thumb forever." The message read, "You gave us a way out." But the most dramatic blow came from the legal filings themselves. Dominic Reyes, now working closely with state investigators, uncovered a pattern of fraudulent activity that stretched back more than a decade. Off-the-books accounts, shell companies used to funnel corporate funds for personal gain, and records of payoffs to contractors and internal auditors had all been buried in an encrypted drive found on one of the devices from the storage unit. Richard, who had once described the Carters as carefully contained chaos, now said simply, they built an empire control, but they never planned for someone like Michael or someone like you. Emily remained composed, choosing not to speak to the press despite numerous requests. Instead, she focused on securing the twins' routine again, enrolling them in a new preschool, scheduling health checkups, and building a quiet life in a home she had chosen herself, far from the town where her in-laws' influence once reached into every corner. But the past had not yet fully released its grip. One rainy morning, as Emily sat at her dining room table reviewing some of the estate's transition paperwork, Grace called her directly. "They've issued indictments," Grace said. "Multiple counts. Fraud, witness tampering, document destruction, obstruction of justice." Emily didn't speak at first. "And they'll be arrested?" she finally asked. "Yes. There's a sealed warrant for Charles. Victoria's expected to turn herself involuntarily, but the DA has made it clear, no special treatment." 2 days later, it was all over the news. Charles Carter, once the lion of corporate leadership in Ohio, was arrested outside his estate. He wore no handcuffs in front of cameras, but the look on his face, tight-lipped, hollow-eyed, was unmistakably that of a man who had lost everything. Victoria arrived at the courthouse surrounded by lawyers, her head high, but her silence was telling. No press conference, no statement of innocence, just the knowledge that the world she had once controlled through whispered orders and polished smiles had finally collapsed. Emily watched it all from her living room, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "I thought I'd feel more," she said aloud, as if speaking to Michael. Anger, triumph, something. But all she felt was clarity. Their fall hadn't come from her vengeance. It had come from their own actions, exposed by their underestimation of a woman they thought too weak to fight. Over the next several weeks, Emily worked with Richard to reallocate the assets from the estate. In accordance with Michael's final instructions, trusts were established for Lily and Noah, and a large portion of the recovered funds, money that had once been hidden, was designated for charitable giving. One afternoon, Emily met with nonprofit consultant to finalize plans for the Carter Family Resilience Fund, a name she had chosen deliberately. "I want this money to help single mothers who are trapped in systems that protect the powerful," she told the consultant. "Women who've been silenced, disbelieved, left behind." She paused. "And I don't want the Carter name to mean power anymore. I want it to mean healing." The consultant nodded, visibly moved. "We'll make sure it does." The fund was launched with an initial endowment of $10 million. Press coverage hailed Emily not just as an heiress, but as a reformer, a woman who had survived and then rebuilt not just her own life, but pathways for others to do the same. Meanwhile, the legal system pressed forward. Charles's legal team attempted to settle, but the DA refused. The state wanted a public trial. Victoria's case was separated from his, based on her voluntary surrender and cooperation. But even she faced serious charges, particularly regarding the custody interference and the unauthorized access to Michael's private vault. Emily attended none of the hearings. She didn't need to. Her presence had already been etched into the story through testimony, evidence, and victory. On a quiet Friday morning, Julia found Emily standing at the edge of the backyard, watching Lily and Noah playing beneath the trees. "Are you okay?" she asked. Emily smiled faintly. "I am now." She turned to Julia. "It's strange. I spent so long fighting for what Michael left behind. And now that I have it, the thing that matters most isn't the money or the victory. It's them," Julia said, gesturing to the children. Emily nodded. "And the fact that I still have my voice, that they didn't take it from me." Julia leaned on the fence. "You never lost it, Em. You just had to fight to be heard." As autumn settled over the town, the Carter name faded from the front pages. The company was restructured under new leadership. The estate, once guarded like a fortress, was listed for sale, and the courtroom that had once witnessed a family war now returned to quiet routine. But among the people who had watched it unfold, those who had doubted her, those who had helped her, and even those who had feared her, Emily Carter's name meant something different now. Not scandal, not inheritance, but truth and resolve, and a fight that could not be bought, silenced, or broken. The first sign that things had truly changed came not from the headlines nor the courts, but from the quiet mornings in Emily's new home. For the first time in months, she woke not from nightmares or restless pacing, but from the gentle sound of the twins' laughter downstairs, unburdened, bright, and free. The house she had chosen was a modest colonial on the edge of a quiet neighborhood 2 towns over, far from the Carter estate and everything it had come to represent. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. It had a sunlit kitchen, a fenced backyard with space for a garden, and just enough creaks in the floorboards to give it character. She painted the walls herself, picked out the furniture with the twins in tow, and planted flowers with Lily, while Noah spent hours chasing butterflies in the yard. Each day brought small moments of peace that once felt impossible. Walking Lily and Noah to school, organizing bookshelves without worry, cooking meals in silence, free of the tension that had once followed her like a shadow. But Emily hadn't forgotten what it took to reach this point, and she hadn't forgotten the women she had met during the darkest hours, those whose messages had poured in during the trial, who had shared their own stories of injustice, of being pushed aside, disbelieved, erased. It was for them that she had created the Carter Family Resilience Fund. And now, with the estate formally settled and the legal barriers behind her, it was time to make it real. She hired a small team, social workers, legal consultants, and outreach coordinators. Not all came from polished resumes or corporate experience. Many were women who had once stood where Emily had, bruised by the system, but not broken. They established a temporary office in a shared space downtown, but Emily envisioned something more permanent. She found a building, a weathered two-story brick structure that had once housed a community clinic, and began plans to renovate it into a full-service support center. Legal aid, childcare services, housing referrals, and mental health counseling all under one roof. At the first staff meeting, Emily addressed the team herself. "We're not here to fix people," she said. "We're here to stand beside them until they can reclaim what was taken, whether that's safety, dignity, or a place to call home." The room was silent. Then someone began to clap. Soon the whole room joined in. As construction began on the new center, Emily returned to something she hadn't thought possible in months: teaching. She took on a part-time role at a local adult education program, teaching evening classes in writing and communication. It grounded her, gave her purpose beyond survival. One evening, as she graded essays at the kitchen table, Noah sat across from her with a drawing. "It's you," he said, holding up the paper. Emily looked. In the childlike sketch, she stood on a stage with a cape, holding the hands of two smiling children. Behind her, a giant heart filled the sky. "You made me a superhero?" she asked, smiling. "No," Noah replied. "You already were." She kissed his forehead and held him close, her eyes stinging with tears. But not every day was easy. Occasionally, she still heard whispers when she went into town. Former Carter sympathizers who had clung to the illusion of the family's reputation. A few gossiped in grocery store aisles. Some gave her cold glances. One older woman even muttered as Emily passed, "All that money. Some people don't know how to be quiet once they get it." Emily didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She had long since learned that her power came from silence with direction, not from shouting over ignorance. Then came an unexpected letter. It arrived without return address, written in the neat, formal script she recognized immediately. It was from Victoria. "Asterisk Emily," it began. "I am not writing to seek forgiveness. I know that is not mine to ask for. But I am writing because I have seen what I was too blind to recognize before, what Michael saw in you. Strength not in defiance, but in protection. The very thing I claim to value. I spent years trying to destroy in you. I see now how wrong I was. And I hope in whatever small way that knowing I understand this, too late though it may be, brings some measure of closure." Emily read the letter 3 times. She didn't respond. Closure didn't come in apologies. It came in the life she was rebuilding, brick by brick, moment by moment. On the first day of spring, the Carter Family Resilience Center officially opened its doors. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held, modest but full of heart. Survivors and advocates gathered. Journalists returned, though fewer this time, their questions gentler. Emily stood beneath a banner bearing the center's mission, to amplify the voices that were once silenced. She spoke briefly to the crowd. "I'm not here as an heir, or as a widow, or even as a mother," she said. "I'm here as someone who was told again and again that the powerful always win. And now I know the truth. They only win when the rest of us stop fighting." The crowd applauded, but Emily didn't bask in it. She turned to the volunteers, hugged the first young woman who walked through the center's doors asking for help, sat down beside her and simply listened. That night, as the lights dimmed and the doors closed, Emily stood alone in the quiet front lobby, looking out through a glass onto the street beyond. The center was still new. The work ahead was vast. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was living, and that was the greatest victory of all. It was nearly 1 year to the day since Michael's death when Emily sat down to write the letter. She had thought about it for weeks, jotting fragments on napkins, dictating paragraphs into her phone during quiet drives, or whispering the words into the dark after twins had gone to bed. But now the time had come to give them form one last time. She sat at her kitchen table with a blank document open and the spring breeze drifting through the window. Across from her, a photograph of Michael rested on the shelf, a candid shot taken by Julia during a summer picnic. He was laughing, lifting Noah onto his shoulders, Emily half visible behind them, smiling. She had kept the photo off her wall for months, unsure whether it would bring her comfort or sorrow. Now it felt like neither. Now it felt like a reminder. She began to write. To those who have ever been told to be silent, To those who have ever been told to endure, to those who have been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, this is not just my story. This is a story about legacy, what we leave behind when the world stops seeing us as real, and what it means to reclaim that. She didn't name names in the letter. She didn't point fingers. It wasn't about revenge or scandal. It was about what Michael had intended with his final acts and what she had done with what he left behind. Michael did not just leave me an inheritance. He left me trust. He left me responsibility. He left me a question I had to answer for myself. What do you do when the life you planned is taken from you? She paused, sipped her tea, and continued. I chose to fight, not for money, not even for justice, though justice came. I fought because I knew what it meant to have your voice ignored in a room full of power, and because I had 2 children watching every step I took. The letter, when completed, spanned just under 2 pages. She titled it simply, His Legacy Is Not Their Name, That Weekend. She sent it to 3 national publications, including one that had covered the original estate battle with little sympathy. She didn't expect all of them to publish it, but within 3 days, all 3 did. The response was immediate. Letters, emails, messages poured in from across the country. Some came from women who had watched from the sidelines and never spoken. Others came from lawyers, social workers, even judges, praising her for what she had accomplished, not just in the courts, but in the cultural conversation that followed. One message, signed only with initials, read, You made me believe that silence isn't safety, that staying small isn't protection. I saw myself in your story, and I'm finally ready to speak. Emily never responded to the messages directly. She didn't need to. The Resilience Center was now fully operational, and every day brought new visitors, each with a different story, but the same need, to be heard. One morning, as she walked into the center, one of the counselors met her with a clipboard. We've had another request from a local college, she said. They want you to speak during their Women in Justice Conference next semester. Emily smiled. Let's put on the list. She still wasn't used to the idea of being a speaker, a figure, an example. She had never wanted a spotlight. But if her voice could make space for others to stand up, she would continue. And still, Michael remained with her in quieter ways. She had recently opened one last envelope, one that had been tucked behind the others in the vault, unmarked, almost forgotten. Inside was a single sheet of paper with only 2 sentences. I don't know if this letter will ever find you, but if it does, I hope I gave you enough to keep going. I hope you'll forgive me for everything I couldn't protect you from. She had sat with that letter in her hands for an hour before folding it back up and placing it in a small wooden box alongside her wedding band. Some things, she had come to understand, don't need answers, only remembrance. Lily and Noah were thriving. Lily had started asking questions about her father, more thoughtful, more frequent. Emily answered with stories. How Michael used to sing to them when they were babies. How he once burned dinner trying to cook her anniversary surprise. How he called her Stormlight when she was angry and unrelenting. Noah, ever curious, wanted to know what Michael had done for work. Emily tried to explain business operations in terms a child could understand. He built things, she said. He built things to help other people's work run better. Noah considered it. Like how you build places to help moms? Emily nodded. Exactly like that. They planted a tree in the backyard that spring. A young oak, tall enough to cast a shadow, strong enough to grow with them. They named it after Michael, though they never said it aloud. They just called it his tree. One afternoon, after school, Lily placed a painted rock at its base. It had 3 stick figures holding hands and the words, "We are safe," written in pink. Emily watched from the kitchen window, heart swelling in a way that had nothing to do with pain. This was Michael's legacy. Not the estate, not the money, not the courtroom battles. It was the safety he gave her in death that he had struggled to provide in life. It was the home she built from ashes. It was her children learning what love looked like when it refused to break. On the 1-year anniversary of his passing, she didn't hold a memorial. She didn't gather people or say anything publicly. Instead, she took Lily and Noah to the park Michael used to love, spread a blanket under a tree, and watched them laugh as they played tag on the grass. as the sky shifted from blue to gold. Emily looked upward and whispered one final thing she had held back all this time. "Thank you." She didn't need a reply. The wind through the branches, the laughter of her children, and the strength in her own heartbeat were more than enough. The story wasn't over, but the chapter had closed, and what remained was a legacy not of wealth, but of resilience,